both Masters of Public Policy students at the Hobby School, graduating this spring. And we also wanted to thank Dr. Inkster and the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center on Ethics and Leadership for helping us to set up this student group, where we're hoping this interview with Commissioner Ellis will be the first of several conversations that we have around intersectional policy issues. Before we begin officially, just a few housekeeping items. We would prefer if you guys have questions that you hold them until the end. There will be a time for a question and answer period. And given the time constraints of our conversation today, we are focused on racism as a public health crisis, which this idea came to us, Commissioner, from your Precinct 1 website, and we were extremely curious about the intersection of those two areas. So I just went ahead and put in the chat for everybody who's here. If you're not familiar with the website, please check it out while we're having our conversation. And if you have something to add, you can feel free to type in the chat or use the raise your hand function. And yeah, I think that's it. Whitney, would you like to introduce?
Yeah, so I just want to go ahead and read the lovely bio that Commissioner Ellis's team put together for us. So Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis was born and raised in Houston's Sunnyside neighborhood. The proud son of a yardman and a maid, Ellis attended Texas public schools from grade school through law school. He holds a bachelor's degree from Texas Southern University, a master's degree from the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, and a law degree from the University of Texas School of Law. As Commissioner of Harris County Precinct 1, Ellis has played a critical role on the court through securing misdemeanor bail reform, creating flood equity guidelines, creating stronger worker protections and economic opportunity provisions, securing funding for indigent defense and COVID-19 recovery funding, including direct relief for residents, small businesses, emergency rental assistance, and shelters for those experiencing homelessness, as well as other innovative programs, including providing providing computers to low-income students. Before serving as county commissioner, Ellis was elected to Houston City Council and served 3 terms before being elected to the Texas Senate in 1990. For 26 years, he represented Texas' 13th State Senate District, and he passed over 700 pieces of legislation. On November 8th, 2016, Ellis was elected county commissioner and sworn into office on January 1st, 2017. As county commissioner, Ellis prioritizes inclusive economic growth that uplifts low-income communities, ensures access to parks and green space in underserved neighborhoods, advances criminal justice reform that protects the rights of all people, and provides safe, affordable transportation options. Following Hurricane Harvey, Ellis successfully advocated for equitable investment in flood control infrastructure and disaster recovery for vulnerable communities through a $2.5 billion bond approved by voters in 2018. On a personal note, he is an avid art collector and cycling enthusiast, and Commissioner Ellis is married to Alicia Green Ellis, and they have 4 children. And he doesn't know I'm adding this part, but everybody I know who works for him or works with him just sings his praises nonstop. So we're so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Whitney. Good to be with you. And I do want to say how proud I am to have played some role in the creation of the Hobby School. I guess it didn't mention, they didn't think about it. I guess I've been around so long. I got my start working for Governor Bill Hobby. When I was a senior at Worthing High School out in Sunnyside and student council president, he was running for lieutenant governor in 1972. So on my prom night, I'll never forget, we were out working for free for these young people in his campaign, hanging up signs, primarily in Black neighborhoods, saying Bill Hobby will make a good lieutenant governor, honestly. And I still talk to him, not as much as I'd like to. I think there's a regular Tuesday morning roundtable over at his condo for breakfast, and I go when I can. I think I went about a month ago, but glad to be with you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so first of all, we're hoping you can tell us, given that the majority of us are public policy students, we're curious to know the ways that Precinct 1 is taking on structural racism in the programs and allocations of funds.
Hey, well, thank you. Hey, I forgot to mention, by the way, I hope all of them are doing well with that statistics class. What they don't put in my bio was I didn't know you had to have a B average, and that two-tail probability test gave me hell. But now I ended up becoming a banker, so I guess my ability with numbers is a little better now. But look, after the George Floyd tragedy, everybody was talking about equity issues and what we could do worldwide to deal with racism. And I read somewhere where it may have been Boston, some city passed a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. All of us in government are big on these resolutions. And it was a running joke. It would drive me nuts. When I was on the city council in Houston State Senate, we'd spend 2 hours with people passing a resolution. And it means something when your name is on it, Allison, or Whitney, or Casey. If it's a resolution for you, it means something. We spent a lot of time on that. And so when I saw that, I said, okay, well, that's good. We ought to pass a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. But then I decided we need to put some meat on it. I don't just want beautiful words flowing on a piece of paper. But that's a big problem worldwide, even with us. When you go back and read our constitutions, those were lofty goals. We have yet to live up to them. So I decided we'll pass the resolution, but come back with some substance on what we can do. Some of which I think we were doing even before the Floyd tragedy, but I wanted some substance on it. So you take things like with flood equity. When I was in the Senate and I got elected to this position but hadn't gotten sworn in, I met with the head of flood control. And he was telling me about how most of the money for disaster recovery is distributed based on a BCR. It was a benefit to cost ratio. Sounds good. So in other words, if the federal government is going to spend money after a disaster like Harvey, they want to spend the money where they get the biggest bang for their buck. Sounds nice for public policy people until you peel a little below the surface. That means that you would only spend the money to protect wealthy neighborhoods, like the one I live in now, not the one I came out of in Sunnyside. And all around this country, we've done that through FEMA, through the Corps of Engineers. And then think about it. And he was telling me, Senator, Commissioner to be, you'd be the perfect person to get Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Congressman Al Green, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia to raise this issue. And so I thought about it and I said, you want me to go where did it come from? Where did that get in the law? So it turns out some of it goes back to an executive order from President Reagan back in the early 80s when I was a staffer on Capitol Hill. Some of it is written in the statute. But so I decided when we do that $2.5 billion bond package, I'm going to push for some equity guidelines on how we decide where we're going to spend our money. Most local units of government chase the federal money. You want to leverage it. So we will only fund projects all around the state and around the country locally if we can get a federal match. If the federal match uses BCR, benefit to cost ratio, that means we're all chasing federal money and we're only doing the wealthier neighborhoods first. So I said, forget that. The leverage I had was, I think I could make a little noise and I could kill that bond issue. So I raised it. So that's one thing that we did. I didn't spell out what equity guidelines meant. That would have been a separate fight. Just broad language, don't just at least in principle, we are going to agree that we will have equity guidelines, some flood equity prioritization framework, and we'll figure that out later. The other area of equity that I want to fight for was City of Houston started a program in 1984. I was on council, raising a little cane to get it done, to create a program for minority and women-owned businesses to participate. Because of historical racism, the good old buddy system that has existed in this country, that existed in the city for so long. The county never did it. School district did it. HISD put together a program about 2 years later. County never did it. Because of a Supreme Court ruling, if you want to have a minority women's business enterprise program, you have to do this thing called a disparity study. It's very expensive. And so I told my colleagues, and I had people come and testify at Commissioner's Court saying that it's about time for Harris County to wake up, come into this century, have a program. So the court did agree we would do a disparity study to see if we could legally justify having a program. It takes 2 years to do the study. They did say you had to pay for it out of your budget, about $650,000 to go and do it. It's like reconstructing your tax returns. We were shocked when the data came back. It showed in the most diverse county in the country, a minority county, might I add, 0.5%, not 5%, 0.5% of the county's spending went to Black-owned businesses. I think the number for Hispanics might have been 6%. Overall, it was about 9%. The city spending is about 25, 27%. But those are two areas. But look, on everything we do, we try to make sure we have an equity guideline, so that you think about historic discrepancies that have existed. When we gave out money from the COVID relief, federal money, we didn't just do first come, first serve. We put together a prioritization framework so we hit those who were the poorest first. And we try to do that throughout virtually everything we do. So I'd like to think that resolution was more than just nice flowing words that we aspire to as much as we can. We try to use an equity lens that you can measure with metrics. Going back to that C in statistics, I'm trying to make up for that. It's just stuck in my head. I have almost lost my scholarship back in 1976. Sorry, it's a long answer, but.
No, that was great. And we all have a stats quiz tonight. So we are like in that stats anxiety. We're right there with you. We feel that. And thank you for that answer. I personally just always appreciate substantive wins over symbolic wins. And it sounds like that is something you have definitely prioritized. Can you tell us a little bit more about what a racial equity impact assessment would look like if conducted in Harris County?
Well, we pull together some of the best research that we could find about racial equity frameworks on how we distribute our ARPA funds, the money from the Biden administration, as an example. And what it does is it targets delivery of the same outcomes and opportunities across populations for maximum accessibility and fairness to help reduce disparities in health, housing, and economics. So what that equity framework does is it has goals and strategies for advancing equity in selection, development, implementation, and evaluation of projects that we fund. And that's a long intellectual discussion. The bottom line is have metrics so you can measure with virtually everything you do based on research and science that comes from academics. And then you get policymakers like I am, like your students will be at some point, to figure out how to put a face on it. It's like, as an example, some people would say you ought to distribute money like the rent relief that we did. Just go out and do it on a random basis. Just go online and announce you're going to post it. And first come, first serve. There's an inherent inequity in that. Many people don't have access to the internet. Before we started this call, I have 3 degrees. I couldn't figure out how to get the dang volume on. I had to bring the smart people in here. You got me? So you got to make sure you take into account everybody does not have the ability to sit there dialing into the number on the phone or going online so they can do the application. So you got to come up with some metrics and decide how you give out the limited amount of money you have based on those who need it most. And maybe you decide you want some criteria other than that. You could decide historically in the county, we just divide everything 4 ways, but that wouldn't take into account historical disadvantages. Or we have these fiefdoms. You just dole it out and let each of the commissioners decide. We're human beings, just like you all. You got me? So how would we decide? I would hope, God forbid, anyone would do this. Hopefully I wouldn't. But you may decide, you know what? I'm going to distribute it in the neighborhoods where they like me and I like them. So you don't do that. Pull away from this randomized kind of, do random based on some sense of equity first. So that's the short of how you do it. But what we did was we brought in some experts, academics to help us develop our framework. And we're trying to apply it in most things we do. And maybe going back to being in grad school, I try to put a face on this stuff and not get overly academic or intellectual on it. Break it down and make sure I try to explain to people why. So that's essentially what our racial equity framework is. It's race, it's income. You know, obviously so many of our problems that relate to inequalities go back to the basic racism built into the history of our country. But there are obviously poor people who may not be minorities that we want to make sure that we bring out of poverty as well.
Thank you so much. Okay, this question is really unique to the challenges that you face in Harris County, but we wanted to know, given that Harris County is such a large, unique system, because of the size and scope of Harris County, what challenges does your office face when you are addressing these complex intersectional problems such as racism, public health, equity, but also while managing different funding streams? Because I know that you receive money from the local governments, the state government, the federal government. So you sort of sit in a very unique position. And I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
A big challenge is that most people like to speak about change, but are reluctant to bring it about. Most people are accustomed to things operating a certain way. And anytime you change something, you come up against vested interests who may have benefited, even if they didn't benefit, they were just accustomed to things going a certain way. You know, we've evolved over time. Harris County is 4.8 million people. City of Houston's about 2.2 million people or so. Google it to make sure my numbers are right. I'm just giving you rounded numbers, so I'm not following the talking points my staff did. There are more people in unincorporated Harris County now than there are in the city of Houston. So now let that sink in a second. The largest city in Texas is something called unincorporated Harris County. Now that's the wild, wild west. Counties have limited ordinance making power. We can only pass a regulation in an area where the state gives us permission to do it. When I was in the state senate and counties would ask for more power, I'd say, you think I'm gonna give that power to you yahoos? I don't think so. I've evolved over time. I had no idea. The good Lord didn't intend for us to have more people in unincorporated Harris County than you have in the city of Houston. We got to figure out how we find partnerships with limited resources. Some things that we do good, some things the city does good. It's difficult to figure out how you merge these entities. The city's health department's primary goal is to keep you from going to the hospital. The county's health department, that is primarily their role. We also have mosquito control for the entire region, including the city. The county controls healthcare for the indigent. Used to be called the hospital district. It's the Harris Health System now. City does not do it. If you cannot afford insurance, you don't have a doctor, you're indigent, the county has to pay for that. There have been discussions about how to merge the two. It's very difficult, in part because, as you alluded to, the separate funding streams. You know, I get a lot of my friends at the city, I'm probably spending an unprecedented amount of your money on projects in the city limits. Everything from bike lanes to streets. If you go out coloring, that's your money from precinct 1. Any street I do will be a complete street. There'll be a 10-foot sidewalk on both sides of color. I think about, I don't know, about 20 million over there, so 15, 20 million, about the same amount around TSU. You know, you have those funding issues because the federal government puts strings on its money that we may not want. The city may put strings on some of its money. Other cities, Pasadena, as an example, second largest city in the county. So it's a big challenge. I think because we are so massive, I wouldn't necessarily advocate consolidating everything. Largest county in the country is LA County, by the way. Los Angeles County has a similar governing structure to what we have, 5-person board. All 5 are districts, We have 4 that are from districts. 4 is that 4-finger statistics, remember? 4 that are from districts. The judge is elected countywide. I wouldn't necessarily say we ought to try to consolidate everything, but we got to have some intergovernmental arrangements to figure out how we do more interfacing with one another. But it's a big challenge. And we got to have more dialogue to try and get entities to be consistent on what their rules are. The health area is one area, but in so many areas.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that the unincorporated Harris County is something that comes up a lot in all of our classes when just trying to figure out how do we solve these issues. Okay, so I have a question. So historically, obviously, structural and institutional racism obviously hurts communities of color the worst, right? And I think the more we look at those impacts, the more we see that there's actually a spillover where it's not just like siloed harm that only impacts that community. Like there is a ripple effect that because we have disenfranchised these communities, we are actually all worse off in some ways. So are you able to speak about how the impacts of structural racism and the consequences of poor health in these communities of color that have been created by like policy or lack of policy, how that is manifested beyond just these single communities and have become like larger issues that we are all kind of trying to figure out how to heal and grapple with?
Well, I think this pandemic probably is the best example of how racism, lack of health care, lack of knowledge for people to make healthy choices impacts everybody, even on a global level. First, you put it on that macro level, it's just the vast majority of people in the world have not been vaccinated and don't have access to that relief from COVID. But we all interact with one another. Borders no longer work. People fly. The mutations that come from various strands of COVID shows that what happens in Canada, Mexico, India, China, Africa, wherever, it gets over here to us. But here, even if all of us on this Zoom have been vaccinated, a few in my age group, I've even had the booster. I qualified early. I'm old, I'm Black, I'm overweight, and I'm in politics. So they said, come on, get it. But even if you've been vaccinated, we don't stay in silos. You may be on a Zoom now. Some enjoying it because they don't have to go to class, but you still go into the grocery store. I tell my staff members who weren't in here to help me with this technology, I bet if I follow them, they're out. They're just not in here. Lack of insurance for people. Texas is one of only 2 big states that didn't draw down affordable care money. Other people not having access to healthcare impacts all of us. So it's a big challenge now. And hey, even encouraging people to make healthy choices or changing neighborhoods so healthy choices are accessible to them. I think you public policy students can Google it. My guess is the #1 cause of death in the world, not clearly in the West, would be what we eat, somehow related to obesity. You got me? And, my age, I know the rule, it's 80-20. And some of you who know me know I'm a big cyclist. I remember some years ago, might have been 2001, I did a bike ride across Texas and I gained 5 pounds. I had to carb up. You got me? I didn't have to, but I carved up so I wouldn't be the last one coming in every day. And so, some of them may have been muscle, but, it's a challenge and you got to give people access because rules 80-20 is 80% what you eat, 20% you working out, being an Iron Woman or Iron Man, Iron whatever. But yeah, it does. The impact of structural racism and the consequences of those poor health in those communities manifests itself in everyday life all around our county, particularly because we're so diverse. and we're so massive.
Awesome. Thank you for speaking to that. So we have like 18-ish minutes left, and we wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. We do have more questions we want to ask you, but we also want to respect.
If I give it shorter answers, I'll try to be shorter when you go.
No. You've been perfect. We got to all our high priority questions, but I wanted to give the audience a chance to engage first because we've all been really excited to talk to you. So. If anyone has a question, you can go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask it. Matthew, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Commissioner Ellis, for being here. Just to let you know, I do work for the Intergovernmental Affairs Office there at Harris County. So into Reed's shop for a while, but we all know he decided to leave us for greener pastures. So
yes.
One thing I'm working on in the office is the public health funding disparity. You know, the CDC is providing the city of Houston with a lot of money, especially during the pandemic. And Harris County is not getting as much. They're having to rely on the state of Texas. And when I try to explain the issue, you know, everyone's first instance is, well, why doesn't the city of Houston just pay for it? You know, why don't we use their money? And I'm like, no, this is what we're having with flood control issues. You know, it's how do we explain to people just the sheer population size and, you know, explain that we need the city of Houston can have an exemption for direct funding, but Harris County needs it too. It's not a zero-sum game.
Matthew, I think some of the challenge with that is because counties in Texas have historically been what's the phrase, shadow government. I remember when I first got here, they would tell me, lower your profile, Senator. We're a shadow government. We control about $5 billion. You know, massive population, larger than I think 25 or so, 26 states. But I think the county was sort of wanting to stay in the shadows. You got me? So rarely would Congress designate an appropriation straight to counties. Usually they go to states because they don't want to have to argue with, but 254 counties, I don't know how many cities. I can't remember how many counties in the country, but far more cities. They don't want to, they prefer if they got to claw back the money, if somebody didn't spend it the way they want it spent, meaning the federal government, they just deal with the state, deal with the governor, and you fight it out there. Cities, because they raised their profile, it was common for cities to get a direct allocation. But you know, this go around with ARPA funds as an example and COVID money. We did a pretty good job around the country, counties and cities, of lobbying to do that. But I think it takes, but we created some of that problem. You got me? Counties in general, not just in Texas. I think kind of enjoy it. You know, it's kind of like don't ask, don't tell. Just lay low, keep your head down. Well, you know, that was a time when the average county commissioner was just, you know, when I was leaving the city, they said, oh, Rodney, he'll be off that bike, be a pot-bellied road and bridge commissioner. He won't be able to sit in his old seat on the Senate floor if he comes back up here to visit. But those were the old days. And we really do have to deal with such a vast myriad of issues now. And it's much more than roads. It's really trying to figure out how to get people on a highway to a better life, as opposed to just doing roads. So, but it's getting better. I'd say that ARPA money was an example, but it's going to take time. And people who are doing legislative affairs like you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in with a big, oh no, I'll defer to Trevor. Go ahead, Trevor.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Ellis, for coming to speak with us today. I work in public health, and kind of a governing style I've been reading about a lot is called a health in all policies approach. And it's this idea that policymakers can consider the health and the equity in every decision that they make, whether that be building a road or drawing in economic growth. For example, you talked about the sidewalk example. It's a perfect example. I mean, every time you want to build a road, you want a sidewalk on both sides because it makes sure people can get around who don't have a car. To what extent do you think that the court in Harris County at large follows a health policies approach, and where do you think they can improve?
I think we come a long way from where we were. I use that example of the disparity study on minority women-owned businesses as an example. I think that things stayed the way they were so long because nobody raised the issue. When the guy over flood control was explaining that issue to me about cost benefit to cost ratio, I went to a couple of my friends in Congress and I walked them through it, and they gave me that look that sometimes we give you all. Half the time you all don't know who we are, but then you think we're supposed to remember it all. All you know is senator, congressman, commissioner, wouldn't know my name from Adam. So people will come up and say, do you remember me? You know how we fake it? Well, so I know that look when I explained to several members of Congress, benefit cost ratio, and they gave me that glazed look that I give when I'm trying to remember somebody's name, to not anger them or embarrass them. And so one member said, well, we still have earmarks. That's how we get around that. And I didn't want to say, no, you don't have earmarks anymore. And even when they put them back in, it's only for a small amount of money. But look, I think we're doing it here at the county when it's raised. It's breaking away from this fiefdom thing. There's a tendency to want to say with whatever we do, something came up this week. Church Hidalgo had a proposal, put about 50 million in trying to put lights, sidewalks, clean up trash, abandoned buildings to help deal with crime. Some people are just bad actors. A lot of them have a mental health problem, by the way. How about a pandemic? Many people are having mental health breakdowns. Everybody has a gun. You got the economy, a host of issues, in addition to just bad people. Never would I say they're not just some bad actors out there. But the first impulse from my colleagues was, well, let's just split it between all 4 precincts. And I said, no, I'm not for that. Why would you just go split 50 million? How about people who historically had an advantage? And if you just split it and give it to commissioners, how about this attitude we've had of building roads in neighborhoods where we want to get brownie points as opposed to some equity lens? And here's the interesting thing about poverty in our county is everywhere. So when I talk about equity on affordable housing as an example, most of the affordable housing with tax benefits in the county are in precinct 1. I'll take them all. You got me? But it's not right to force people to continue to live in dilapidated, poor communities that they came out of. And it's hard to break up from it. I'm from Sunnyside. I love Sunnyside. It's where I grew up. It's my home, it's everything. Now, would I have been maybe exposed to at my age at 67? I did okay, but I broke through. I just somehow slipped through the cracks. So did my sister, who was president of the school board at one point, U of H grad. My brother didn't. Most people didn't. So we've been better off dispersing affordable housing opportunities in other parts of the county. So the challenge is to break away from this fiefdom mentality. Even when I was on council, everybody's worried about that dang district. When I was in the Senate, everybody gets caught up on real estate. You got me? Now, maybe I've just been somewhat oblivious to that because being in a city, I always had the privilege of representing downtown most of the universities. I'm not hung up on it. Nor do I think because something's in the Senate district, the county commissioner precinct that I represent is my building. Give me a break. You get me? Sometimes I want to tell them, they'll get angry if I'm getting involved in some issue in their precincts. Why are you in my precinct? I'll say, well, why are you downtown? Last time I checked, you in the county courthouse. You're in my precinct. You got me? So this fiefdom mentality, I think, is the biggest challenge. It's not, I got to tell you this, when I left, I was leaving the Senate and I came home, told my daughter, who's now a freshman in college, what was that, about 6 years ago, that I'm going to leave the Senate and be a county commissioner. She'd probably get mad if she knows I said this. So she said, okay, well, what do they do? So I'm trying to explain it. She said, well, okay, I guess this is what you want to do, Daddy. Then she said, well, we still have our big office up at the Capitol. So I said, no. Well, what about our apartment in Austin? Well, no. So I said, in fact, just in case you end up in politics, that was never our office. By the way, that office belonged to the people. It was not our office. So don't need to disabuse yourself of that notion. But it's that fiefdom mentality that I find to be the most difficult thing when I'm trying to figure out how to put equity, use the equity lens on everything we do.
I have a question, and this is Whitney participant, not Whitney host asking. But you brought up something really interesting about how like some people are just bad actors, right? I find that similarly, some people just don't care when you try to explain that's not equitable or that's not fair, right? How do you navigate those conversations with colleagues when you can tell that they just don't have a shared value in equity the same way that you do?
Well, the first thing I try to do is, if I know the conversation is coming, I try to ride my bike. I'm trying to learn how to swim, or I take a deep breath. I try not to drink coffee. As you can tell, I'm a fairly high energy person. The last thing you want to do is get some caffeine. And I try to put myself in their shoes. So for your students, all of us in the policy arena, when I was in law school, I enjoyed studying to get my master's much more than law school, by the way. Law school is mainly the Socratic method, but they would tell me, to argue both sides of the issue. And sometimes when I get up on the Senate floor, I don't have to give all these speeches now. That's why my answers are not as crisp. But on the Senate floor, if I'm arguing my point, I'd go back to law school where they would tell me, make sure I can argue the other side. And at times, really, I could hear this voice in the back of my head when I'm trying to make my point, argue the other side. And I want to say, well, you shut the hell up. You got me. But try to put yourself in the other person's position. And when I can do that and kind of get out of my experience, I try to look at it through their lens. At some point, we have to make a decision. But if you can use patience as much as you can, I guess I'm the last one to do that. I'm pretty, 700 bills I pass, I take on the tough stuff. You got me? And I obviously, as you can tell from this presentation, when I was a kid, they called it, I guess they still call it ADD. I can remember as a kid, they put me on Ritalin to try to calm me down. Now they know Ritalin will speed you up. So they were thinking something's wrong with this kid. If I back away from my interest in juggling, I'm better off doing 5 things at one time. If I just have to do one thing, I need to get on a bicycle or something just to calm down and deal with it. But I just say, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to try to put a face on the issue. And look, you fight for what you want. That's what I do. I ask for what I want. But at the end of the day, I'll try to compromise. I'll take what I can get and be careful that I don't fold too quickly. But that's been my art of politics for me.
Thank you.
Dr. Engster, did you still have a question?
No, I'll let you. You all had came up with lots of questions. I am interested in Commissioner Ellis's secret for what he does when someone comes up. I didn't quite get how he deals with that, but no, you guys go ahead and finish up the questions.
So I have some I can pull from that were submitted, but the people who submitted them are not here right now. So I am fine with opening it one more time to audience, but if no one has anything, I do have one more question at least that I would like to ask. But first, anybody else go. Going once, going twice.
All right, I'm jumping.
Oh, Casey, I think you have your mic. Yeah, you're unmuted now, Casey.
Okay. Hey, Commissioner, thanks for being here. You said 700 bills you passed. What was the most memorable one?
It's having that ADD, Casey. But I think that the Texas grants bill, some of you all probably may be in college on it. I do hate, it was patterned after free tuition for students who qualify. I think when I left the Senate, we were somewhere in the neighborhood about $3 billion on it. It is not, unlike in this job, I can go see a street or a sidewalk. I can roll down Cullen and say, I did this with your money. So it did, they won't know that I passed that, or I did it because my daughter was in, I think, first grade in Atlanta, Georgia. And I went to a school one day and all these kids at this, school were talking about how they had to get a B average so they could get free tuition to go to college in Georgia. And I wonder, what is this? And I'm struggling to pay this tuition for her to go to this school because she's in public schools here. I didn't know Atlanta. And Andrew Young was mayor, and I called and said, hey, you all have majority transfer. I'm not sure where my ex-wife and daughter will be living. So he said, I'm working on improving the schools, but you need to spend the money. Don't be tight, Rodney. Put it in the international school. And I'm thinking, I'm struggling to pay this tuition. And these kids talking about getting a B in first grade. And when I found out what it was, I came back, got my interns. I still do this TLIP program. Some U of H students, I had a throwdown press conference with them acting like they were just regular students. And they were interns working around the Capitol, like Ender was one of those interns. Matthew, go to the press conference, told a couple of them in that breakdown crying about this tuition. We put on a show. We got a little pilot, $10 million. That's about you Google it. I bet it's a couple of $1 billion, might be $3 billion. I say that one, but there are a lot of good fights. The hate crimes bill, proud to have passed it with sexual orientation in it. Named it after James Byrd, a horrific modern day lynching, dragged a guy down the street in Jasper, Texas, because he's Black. But I tried to pass that bill for a decade. Every session, legislation would blow up over that bill. And then I'd say a lot of criminal justice stuff I passed. I chaired the Board of the Innocence Project for about 13 years. And so I would take those cases, some from Texas, some from around the country, and use them to put a face on things like our compensation statute for people who were wrongfully convicted. Strongest discovery statute in the country until New York passed a stronger discovery statute a couple of years ago. But there are a lot of them. Some of them ought to be repealed, might I add. My ego would let me admit that. I'd 700 bills if I had the chance. In fact, some of the tax break stuff that I passed, somebody ought to go in there with a meat cleaver and tighten up some of that stuff. But a lot of good memories. Enjoyed every day of it. And I'm enjoying every day of being in this new job.
Wow. Well, we do want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's time, but we just can't thank you enough for carving out a moment for all of us today. This has been really illuminating and informative. The opportunity to speak with somebody who's doing the type of work that you're doing at the level that you're doing is just really, we feel very privileged. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I want to encourage your students, by the way, to run, get in the arena, particularly you young women. Get out there. Look, I enjoyed being in the bureaucracy for Governor Hobby. We need good people doing that. You had a great school, great name. Read Bill Hobby's book, by the way. A lot of my politics is fashioned from watching him when I was your age, hanging around the Capitol for Bill Hobby. Thank you. And I'm honored to have been, I think, one of your first speakers for this series.
The first. Thank you so much. This will be recorded for those of you that were here today. And if you know someone that was unable to attend, we will be sending out a link so that you can watch it online. And there will be future events. We're just not sure who the speakers will be yet. So stay tuned for more information on that. And thanks for taking time out of your day to be with us.